All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a story many of you probably think you know, the Andes flight disaster. But we're going way beyond the sensational headlines. We're going to really dissect the story of Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571. The question isn't just that 16 people survived, it's how. How did they manage to endure the absolute impossible?
So this message here, I come from a plane that fell in the mountains. It's scribbled on a piece of paper. And it's basically the end of the story, right? But to really, truly get what those words mean, written after 72 days of being totally cut off from the world, we've got to go all the way back to the very beginning.
Okay, so first things first, let's really get into this. You might think the most important thing for survival is, I don't know, a flare gun or something, but no. The most crucial factor here was who was on that plane. See, these weren't just a bunch of random people on a flight. Most of them were from a rugby team, the Old Christians Club. And that bond they already had, that social connection, it turned out to be their single most powerful survival tool. It's kind of wild when you think about it.
And that team bond, it was built on something they called the rugby ethos. What is that? Well, it's a mindset. It's all about putting the group first way before yourself. It means you got to be tough, you got to have a high tolerance for pain, and you have to absolutely 100% trust your teammates. This, pack mentality they learned on the rugby field, it basically gave them a ready-made social structure that stopped everything from falling into complete chaos right after the crash.
All right, now let's go to the moment itself, the moment their entire world just shattered. We're going to look at how the sheer physics of this crash created a psychological crisis that's almost impossible to imagine. So get this, the plane clips a mountain ridge, and just like that, the wings and tail are ripped clean off. The rest of the fuselage, basically just a metal tube, becomes a toboggan from hell, sliding down a glacier at almost 200 miles an hour before it just slams into a snowbank. I mean, the impact was absolutely catastrophic. People were thrown forward like a deck of cards being shuffled. It's just horrific. And that really shows you the level of shock we're talking about. I mean, think about it. 1 second, you're in a warm, pressurized cabin, maybe reading a magazine. The next, you are in the thin, freezing air of this enormous, empty landscape of snow and rock, a place they later called the Glacier of Tears. That instant change, that environmental whiplash, it caused a lot of them to just dissociate. Their brains literally couldn't process what was happening.
Okay, so this timeline of the first 11 days, it's just brutal. It shows you how hope was systematically just stripped away. For those first 10 days, they're in what you could call active waiting. They're rationing food, tending to the injured, all because they're absolutely sure that help is coming any minute. And then, day 11. Someone gets a small transistor radio to work, and they hear the news. The search has been called off. Can you imagine? In that single moment, the realization hits them like a physical blow. No one is coming. They are totally, utterly alone.
So what do you do then? The outside world, for all intents and purposes, doesn't exist anymore. Well, they had no choice. They had to build a brand new society right there on the glacier. A society with its own rules, and one that would force them to face a moral decision that is just impossible.
And the physical reality was just grim. At that high altitude, your body's metabolism goes into overdrive. It's burning calories like crazy. But they had no food, so they were basically starving in a very specific way. Rabbit starvation. That's when your body has no fat to burn, so it just starts consuming its own muscle to stay alive. This horrible physical truth led to this agonizing debate among the group, a debate about doing the one thing no one ever wants to think about.
And honestly, this is where you see their psychological genius, for real. They had to find a way to make the unthinkable thinkable, so they intellectualized it, they reframed it. This wasn't going to be cannibalism, which is a horrifying taboo. No, this was going to be a sacred pact. They all agreed out loud that if they died, they would want their friends to use their bodies to survive. By calling it a communion of love, they created a new moral framework that let them get past the disgust and horror that would have just shattered them mentally. You know, their whole social structure had to adapt too. At first, it was simple. The rugby captain, Marcelo Perez, was the leader. It just made sense. But after he was killed, the whole idea of leadership changed. It wasn't about who you were back home anymore. It became a pure meritocracy. The new leaders were the people who could actually get things done, who could melt snow for water, who could tend to the wounds, who could keep morale up. It was all about what you could do right then and there to help the group survive.
I mean, just when you think it can't get any worse,
It does. They had finally managed to create this grim but functional routine. And then, a massive avalanche comes roaring down the mountain. It completely buries the fuselage in snow, killing 8 more people in an instant. The one place they had for shelter, their sanctuary, was suddenly a tomb. It's just a trauma within a trauma. It proved that absolutely nowhere was safe.
So how do you even cope with that? Well, they developed these incredible psychological defenses. They used gallows humor, making dark jokes about their menu just to let off some steam. They said the rosary together every single night. And yeah, it was about faith, but it was also about routine, about creating some sense of order in the chaos. And this one is key. They would spend hours daydreaming about the future. They'd describe in minute detail the huge meals they were going to eat when they got home. It's like their minds had to live in the future just to give their bodies a reason to survive the present.
That avalanche, that was the real turning point. It was the ultimate catalyst. They finally understood that just waiting there, staying put, was a death sentence. They had to act. And that led to their final, most desperate gamble. They were going to walk out.
So 2 guys, Nando, Parrado, and Roberto Canessa, were chosen to be the expeditionaries. The group gave them extra rations, which was basically the group investing its own life force into these 2 men. And what followed was just one of the greatest feats of endurance in history. A 10-day trek across the Andes Mountains with no mountaineering gear, no experience, not even a map. At one point, they climbed this massive 15,000-foot peak, hoping to see the green valleys of Chile, and all they see are more mountains, stretching as far as the eye can see. And you know what they did? They just kept walking.
But getting rescued, believe it or not, that wasn't the end of their ordeal, not by a long shot. They came back to civilization and were immediately thrown into this massive media firestorm. The whole world started debating the morality of what they get up on that mountain to survive. And they could have hidden from it, right? But they didn't. They chose radical transparency. They held a press conference and they just told the truth. They explained their pact, framing it exactly as they saw it, not as something gruesome, but as an act of communion and love. That explanation, plus getting absolution from the Catholic Church, was absolutely critical. It completely changed the public conversation, and more importantly, it allowed them to start to heal.
And here's the really remarkable part of this story. After all of that, most of the survivors went on to live these incredibly successful, stable lives. They became doctors, businessmen, motivational speakers. They're a textbook example of something called post-traumatic growth. That's when you go through something horrific and you come out the other side with this totally renewed, powerful appreciation for life. It's like they didn't just survive. They grew because of the trauma, not in spite of it.
When you boil it all down, their story just forces you to look at the absolute limits of what it means to be human. You know, they didn't survive because they were a bunch of supermen. They survived because they were the most cohesive group. They proved that morality isn't some fixed, rigid code written in stone. It's a living thing that adapts to circumstance. Their legacy is about way more than just tragedy. It's about hope. And it leaves all of us with one final, haunting question. In their place, what would you do?